Hello, friends, and welcome to the March 10th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with the Texas legislature. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and this week we're joined by Reverend Rob Mueller, pastor of Divine Redeemer Presbyterian Church in San Antonio and one of the clergy leaders of Texas Impact's Ending Gun Violence Issues team. Rob joined us to talk about his conversations with lawmakers on issues of gun violence, and we also talked about the work Rob is doing to engage his denominational body, Mission Presbytery, in policy advocacy on this issue. We'll talk about that, but this also seems like a good time to thank all of you who are part of Texas Impact's legislative engagement groups or issue teams. We appreciate the work you are all doing to stay informed and build relationships both with each other and your elected representatives. If you're not a member, go to texasimpact.org and check out the Action Center for ways you can get involved. But I do want to spend just a moment talking about the team focused on ending gun violence. I've had a chance to sit in on many of their meetings, and many of the attendees are hunters or gun owners, and we'll hear Rob talk about that. But they were all horrified by the events of Uvalde and other acts of gun violence and agree that Texas needs substantive changes. I know in this program and elsewhere, we made a promise to each other not to forget the senseless violence at Uvalde or name another mass shooting close to home for you. My kids are still asking questions about it. So I applaud the work this team is doing to try to bring about change. Hopefully we'll see some during this session of the Texas legislature, but I hope we all keep it front and center in our minds even after the session and leading into election season. Y'all, I'm still mad. And I hope you are too. Anyway, with that, I hope you enjoyed this week's conversation with Reverend Rob Mueller. Joining us for today's conversation is Reverend Rob Mueller, pastor of Divine Redeemer Presbyterian Church in San Antonio and one of the clergy leaders in Texas Impact's Ending Gun Violence Issue team. Rob, thanks for joining us.
I am so glad to be here, Scott. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, and you just had a chance to visit with several state representatives earlier today, and we're going to get into that momentarily, but our listeners love to hear the why question. And so you spent a lot of time meeting with representatives and participating in Texas Impact's Ending Gun Violence Issues team. I wonder if you can start out telling us why this issue is so important to you.
Sure. I think the reason that this issue is so important to me at this particular juncture is because I feel like culturally we have lost a very important balance between rights and responsibilities in this gun violence matter. I grew up in Southern Arizona. My dad is a lifelong NRA member. I've had a gun since I was a young teenager, and I currently own 3 weapons. All of them except one came to me, inherited through my father. And I remember very well when I was a teen, the care with which my dad took to show me how to use a weapon safely, to show me how important it was to always be careful with what I did with that, to take me to the classes, the training classes, the hunter education classes. I had to go to multiple classes to learn how to handle a firearm just in the environment of hunting or the environment of target shooting, which is what we did mostly in my family. What I see today is a society that has lost track of half of that equation. We've lost track of the responsibility side. And we have put all of our weight on the rights side of gun ownership. And I have no interest in taking away those rights, but I have incredibly high interest in elevating the responsibility component of that equation. And so that's part of why I'm in here. The other part of why I'm in here is because I've witnessed too much gun violence in my own life. The first incident that I really recall is when I was a college student teaching kids how to play baseball. And I had a 12-year-old on my team who, in a moment of depression, went into the closet of his mother and father, found the shotgun, and blew his head off. And and the grief and the sadness at this young life that was just taken away because a gun hadn't been stored safely. There hadn't been enough education there. But as I came into ministry, especially in the part of the city that I work in, which is the lowest income part of San Antonio and one of the highest crime rate areas in San Antonio, I began to encounter incident after incident of gun violence. So just a few of them. Kids walking home, their girlfriend from school and being shot by a rival gang member from the local school. A beautiful 22-year-old, vibrant daughter of members of our congregation who was leaving a bar one night, and a man whose advances she had not shown interest in pulled a gun, shot through her pickup truck as she was leaving the parking lot and killed her. And I had to do the funeral for that family. I've had probably 6 different middle-aged men kill themselves with their own weapons in suicide and had to do the funerals for those families. I had a 15-year-old who was living in a well-to-do part of San Antonio and joined a kind of a ISOD-wearing, slacks and dress shoes-wearing gang, and who described to me the power that he felt when they put a submachine gun in his hands and told him to shoot a house up. And then to watch him break down in tears, confessing that someone had died in that act that he committed.
Wow.
And then about 5 or 6 years ago, with one of my buddies who was actually up here advocating with me today with legislators, we were working on the church grounds and heard a gunshot and looked up, and we watched as a gang member in a drug dealing house that we knew was a active drug dealing house emptied a Glock with probably 10 rounds into another human being on Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock while we had 100 people standing in line in our church to gather food boxes because of the food insecurity that we try to respond to in our community. That incident was really powerful for me because we both became material witnesses in that case, and that meant that the drug dealers in the neighborhood knew that I was willing to talk to the police. And all of a sudden I felt the fear and the anxiety that every neighbor in that community feels every single day when a violent action takes place. They're afraid to talk to the police because they're afraid of retaliation. And we ended up creating a situation where I went to the neighbors and I said, these gangs know me. They know who I am. They know where I work. They know what my car looks like. They know what my schedule is. If they want to get me, they can get me. So why don't you all give me what information you have, and I will give it to the police because I've already got a target on my back. And we ended up over the next 18 months shutting down 5 of the drug houses that were dealing drugs in our immediate vicinity, and we watched the violence subside. So I've learned that standing up courageously can actually make a difference in the level of violence that takes place. And so my engagement with legislators right now is really to ask them to stand up and be courageous in the face of the imbalance that we currently have between rights and responsibilities, and to stand up and have the courage to say to their colleagues, look, this needs to change. We need to shift this balance back into something that feels a little more normal and a little more whole for our community. So that's probably the most important factors that have gone into play for me. Certainly, the massacre in Uvalde was a tipping point, a tripping point, where I was like, this is just too much, and I cannot stay silent any longer.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing, and I appreciate your activism. When we talk to folks about making legislative visits, we talk about bringing your whole self and bringing your story, your knowledge of the community to those conversations. And so I think it is really interesting for you to bring your background as both a gun owner and a pastor who's experienced violence in your own ministry to those conversations. You've had a chance to meet with many representatives so far during this legislative session, folks of both parties, many of the members of the committees that will be considering the bills that will be coming forward. What are you learning? What are you hearing? And what do you hope will come out of this legislative session?
Well, the hope that I have really stems from a survey that was done by the Hobby School of Public Affairs and the Mickey Leland, Barbara Jordan School of Public Affairs from Texas Southern University, the hobby schools at University of Houston, where they've identified 4 or 5 significant gun responsibility pieces of legislation that have the support of supermajorities of Texans, including supermajorities of Republican voters. And for me, my hope right now in this session comes from recognizing that there is this groundswell of common ground that is emerging in this conversation in our state. And the hope that if we can engage with legislators in conversation that shares the stories of how this violence is affecting us and affecting our communities, and putting in front of them the evidence that this is something that the people of Texas want, regardless of their political stripe, that we can actually find some common ground that we can act upon during this legislative session. That's my hope.
Yeah, that is my hope too. Do you feel like when you make these legislative visits, any of the representatives or others in the room resonate with you coming in as a clergy, as a person of faith?
Yeah, actually, I just had a wonderful visit with Representative Lujan's office today, and the representative himself could not be there, but he's a person of great faith. He's a Sunday school teacher in his Baptist church on the south side of San Antonio. He sponsors the youth group there. He's been very active in his church. His faith is clearly very important to him. And one of the things that he articulated in a meeting that we had with him was that his faith leads him not to close off dialogue with people, but to listen. And unfortunately, one of the things that can happen within a very polarized political environment is the siloing of perspectives. And Lujan even said, some of my colleagues told me I shouldn't even talk to you because, all you're going to do is attack. And he said, but I don't believe that. I believe that I need to talk to everybody because I need to represent everybody and I need to know what everybody says. And so it was very refreshing for me to sit down with him and to say, hey, or to sit down with his chief of staff, I should say, and to say, Kendall, this is great, and we want this kind of conversation. We are here because we believe dialogue is the way forward as well, and we are not interested in staying siloed. We're interested in figuring out where the common ground lies among ourselves so that we can actually take some action here. So that was a very encouraging visit. Some of the others have not been quite as encouraging. There are some representatives that are pretty clearly stuck in their silos right now and not so interested in listening. But I will say all of the staff members have been very cordial. They've been very friendly. They've been willing to nod and smile, at least, even if they don't agree or have identify any of the common ground that we think exists. It still is valuable for us to get in there. I was explaining to some of the folks from my church who were with me this time, who have never, ever been on the Capitol grounds before to do any of these kind of conversations. And I said to them, look, the legislators are human beings, just like you and I are. And as human beings, they have a limited set of experience. And that limited set of experience is what they operate out of. And if we can't expand that experience for them by sharing perspectives and opinions and life experience that's beyond their own, then they're only going to be able to make their decisions based on their own limited experience. And so our job, even if we don't agree, our job is to put our experience in front of them so that they have a broader picture from which to draw their conclusions and make their decisions. So, and that made a lot of sense to my folks.
Yeah, I love that. And that's one of the things, I'm smiling while you say that, because one of the things we talk about in advocacy training is these people we're meeting with are actual human beings and able to have conversations. And I believe most of them go there to do this for the right reason, to serve their communities. And as representatives of their communities, we do have a story to tell. So I appreciate you telling a piece of your story. Another piece of your story is that you recently had a chance to present a resolution to Mission Presbytery. And leading into this question, I'll just say, I do hope that we are able to make some some progress during this legislative session. But spoiler, we're not going to end gun violence based on actions of the Texas legislature in the next couple of months. This is a long-term project that the church, the communities of faith will have to engage in over a very long period of time. And one of the things that we can do is have conversations among our faith communities, our faith traditions. So talk to us some about the resolution you were able to present at Mission Presbytery and how it was received.
Sure. So just 5 days ago on Saturday, Mission Presbytery met, and the week before I had a conversation with our stated clerk. I said, I'm just feeling like it would be important for our presbytery to say something in this moment, because two of the worst gun violence atrocities in the history of our state have happened within the bounds of our presbytery, the Sutherland Springs massacre and then recently the Uvalde massacre. And I was chatting with her about that, and she was like, oh, this is going to be a really packed meeting. We're voting on all these national resolutions for the General Assembly, and we've got all this to do. And I was like, okay, maybe it's just not going to happen. But I was like, the problem, though, is that our next meeting's not till June, and the legislative session is over by then. And she was like, I'm so sorry. And so I went home a little discouraged and went to the meeting on Friday, and actually the business went really smoothly and we got way ahead of schedule. And so I thought, when I went home that night, I just had this kind of spiritual restlessness within me about it. And as I was driving in from my home in Wimberley to San Antonio, where the meeting was, I just couldn't shake it. And so I dictated this resolution into my phone as I was driving down Interstate 35, and I emailed it to Lori, and I said, Lori, I need to present this resolution as a commissioner's resolution today, so please help me figure out when that can happen. And so the docket had already been voted on, and she said the first step will be we'll have to ask the body to modify the docket to consider a commissioner resolution on gun safety. And when that vote happened, the vote was overwhelmingly positive, simply to consider what was still an unknown resolution. They didn't even know what the content of it was. And so then after all the other regular business was done, we presented the resolution, and the vote on this resolution, there were 209 commissioners at this presbytery meeting from all over South Texas. Our presbytery extends from Marble Falls to Del Rio to Victoria to the Valley. So we had people in that whole region of South Texas there, small towns, large towns, big cities. The vote was 208 in favor and one vote against.
208 to 1. That's a supermajority there, Rob.
Yeah, it was a supermajority. And what that did for me is it reinforced the truth of the study, the survey that had been done by the Hobby School and the Leland Jordan schools that showed that there's this supermajority of people who really want to see some of these things happen. And I was very emboldened by that, very excited by it. Our stated clerk and moderator have now sent that letter to the chair of the Select Committee on Community Safety, and we are sharing it through Presbyterian Peacemaking Fellowship. We're sharing it with members of other presbyteries in our state to see if any of them might be interested and able as well in their presbytery meetings or even within their outreach and justice committees of the presbytery to pass similar resolutions worded appropriately to their jurisdiction. To see if we can get more than one Presbyterian body to stand up and say, yes, we need to do something.
Yeah, so talk to our listeners about why that's important, getting multiple judicatories or denominational bodies, faith groups to sign on and to pass these resolutions.
Sure. So it was, for me, today, as I was going around and visiting with legislators, part of what it does is it gives me a reason to come and speak with them. It's like, this is where our judicatory and the members that represents the members of all of these congregations in this geographic area where you are now serving as a representative. This is how we feel about this. This is how important and urgent we feel this matter is. And it creates a reason to go in and to talk with the legislators about their own constituents from their own area about this particular issue and where we as a people of faith stand on it. And all of them have received that with great interest, with great, in some cases, surprise that the vote was that significantly in favor. It surprised me, I got to say. I expected significantly more opposition from some of the members of my own church because I know this is an issue that has a lot of emotional impact for people and a lot of emotional reactivity for a lot of folks. But to get that overwhelming vote of support for this particular measure was very exciting for me and gave me the energy to want to get out and share that story with the legislators.
What was the mood in the room, both when the resolution was presented and when that vote total came back in?
It was highly energized, highly energized. And afterwards, many, many people came up to me to just say, thank you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for stepping up. Thank you for putting this in front of us. We needed to do this. And there was a lot of gratitude. I actually had another colleague, Walt Lee, who served in LaGrange for many, many years as pastor in LaGrange, and who has been a certified handgun license instructor. He's a pastor, but he taught people how to use handguns so that they could do them safely. And he came up to me afterwards and said, I didn't know that about him. So he told me that story. And then he said, but I stopped doing it because the legislature kept reducing the requirements for certified handgun licenses to the degree that I no longer felt like I could in good conscience say this person is able to safely carry this handgun with this certification because the certification had been so watered down, the requirements of it. And so that was a piece of information that I had not known before either.
That's interesting. So I know you're going to use this resolution and already have, using it to introduce to legislators as you have your meetings. What do you think the rest of the group do? What will the presbytery do with this resolution, or is it just going to be words on a page at the end of the day?
Yeah, our stated clerk and moderator already sent this resolution on the letterhead of our presbytery to the chairperson of the Select Committee for Public or for Community Safety, Representative Guillen. And so they are advocating directly by sending that message to those representatives. And then one of the things that I was doing today was visiting the offices of other members of that same committee and handing them a copy of the resolution on letterhead to say, you need to know this is where our church stands on this.
Nice. All right, listeners. So homework assignment number 1 is to see if you can't get a resolution introduced to your judicatory or governing body of your faith tradition. Rob, any other homework that you would leave with our listeners today?
Yeah, I would just say get in and talk. Get in and talk. They need to hear from us. I brought 2 people from my church who had never, ever done legislative visits before, and they came away both frustrated and empowered. So we were meeting only with Republican members of the Select Committee, and actually one of the more experienced folks who was part of our group said, "So Mueller, next time you probably should meet with at least one person who is more supportive of your viewpoint, so that your people don't go away thinking that everybody in the state legislature is on a different side of this issue than you are." Which is homework that I'm taking home, and I will make sure that when I do future visits, I'll make sure we have one with a person who's on record as being a little more friendly towards some of these propositions.
Fair enough. All right, Pastor, really appreciate the time today. Any last words or shameless plugs you'd like to leave us with?
Shameless plugs. No, I don't think I have any shameless plugs right now. Just maybe just a plug for Texas Impact and the value of the work that you all do, and my gratitude for your support and for your encouragement and for your training in how to do this work. So thanks to you.
All right. Well, I really appreciate the conversation today, and really appreciate the work you did and continue to do at the Capitol and with the team of clergy and faithful advocates that you're working with. Rob, thank you so much.
All right. Take care. Have a great day.
I'd like to thank Reverend Mueller for joining us, but I especially want to thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and are ready to get to work at the Texas Capitol to raise issues important to our families and communities. Texas Impact is participating in several events in the month of March at the Capitol and across Texas, so I look forward to seeing many of you in person or online. Make sure that you aren't missing out by signing up at texasimpact.org and that you're following along on social media. We look forward to resourcing your advocacy, and I'm happy to try my best to answer your questions, so feel free to reach out at scott@texasimpact.org. As we wrap up, make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast and are sharing it with your friends and congregations, and go to texasimpact.org for other ways you can get involved during the legislative session. While you're there, make sure that you and your congregation sign up to be members of Texas Impact to support this podcast and the work of Texas Impact year-round. And with that, I think it's time to close out this episode, so remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.